Hey everybody, Tim Adams here again. First, I want to apologize for a later start than usual on this particular hangout. Suffice to say, it's been a rough day for me. So, but we are gonna slog on through and make this a really hopefully educational hangout for you guys. And today we're talking about why you should not be using HDSLRs in a live production environment. And I'm just going to jump right into it. I I don't really have a dog in the fight. I'm not partnered with any particular manufacturers or anything, so I've got nothing to gain by having the standpoint that I do. But the big kind of top reasons why I don't recommend DSLRs in a live production environment is you don't have a servo zoom, you don't have convenient zoom and focus controls. Most of these cameras are much lighter than an actual built for the purpose video camera, and that does have some effect. You have really shallow depth of field. Your connectivity, so your output, is mostly going to be limited to HDMI instead of the more industry standard HDSDI. And those are kind of the top reasons. Now I'm going to dive into each one of these, but I wanted to just at the head of the show just get into what my reasons are. So let's dive into servo zoom just right off the bat. Why this is important is because having a motorized zoom, to use another word, allows you a lot of very dynamic shots that you wouldn't be able to necessarily replicate without a whole bunch of extra cost with a DSLR lens. And that is because the DSLR lens is primarily meant for taking still pictures, which means that when you're zooming in and out, you're not necessarily having the shutter open. And so with that in mind, there's no reason for Canon, Nikon, these DSLR manufacturers to build in the capability of having power zoom. So they're not going to undergo that R&D and figure that out. Now, yes, there's lots of adapters out there. Some of them are good, some of them not so good. That will allow you to take a bayonet lens or a B4 mount lens that you'd find on something like an ENG camera, electronic news gathering, that like the big television studios use, and adapt that to something like a Blackmagic Cinema Pocket camera or Pocket Cinema camera or something like that. The problem I have is if you're going to put a $20,000 lens on a $1,000 camera, I begin to question your priorities. But the servo zoom, getting back to that, so zoom in, zoom out, push in, push out, or push in, pull out. These are kind of standard terms that we use in a live environment. And I'm defining live environment as in all video signals go through a video switcher. So, and that switched output is being recorded, it's being live streamed, it's being put up on the screens, something like that. So without that servo zoom, a push in, a zoom in that's nice, slow. I tend to call it a feather zoom. It's almost imperceptible. It really forces the viewer to focus on what it is that you want them to focus on, which is an extremely powerful tool to have in your toolbox. Similarly, by having a pull out, you reveal something. And these are tools that you use as a director or as a technical director, whatever term you want to use, to help tell the story of what's happening. And if all you're doing is being on a tight shot of the speaker for an hour or 30 minutes, however long their message is, you're really missing out on opportunities for variety. You're missing out, and you're really forcing your audience to be in a position where they're really close, visually to this person that's talking to them. And if you think about normal conversation,
We had a little problem, looks like. Let me see if I can add him back.
It's not going well for Tim today.
No. See if we can get him back in here, though.
Yeah, it looks like he's coming back in. Tim has
Okay,
joined.
that was bizarre.
There we go. He's back.
What in the world? I'm telling you, today is like cursed or something.
Yeah.
All right, so where did I leave off? Help me out.
Controlling the Zoom to put your audience on what you want them to focus in on. That's a great opportunity.
Okay. Good. So, did we talk about pulling out?
That you just started. Just started that.
Okay. So, pulling out reveals. And that's an incredible tool to have because you want to be able to reveal the space. You want to be able to show people that that this is happening live. It is in front of an audience. It is in a space that's larger than just this, right? And so those are great tools to have, and not having a power zoom really affects that. Now, I can hear people saying this right now. You know, there are cameras out there that do have power zoom lenses, okay? So like the Panasonic Lumix GH series. I have a GH2. That's my primary production camera. They do have servo zoom lenses for that. But, okay, that's great. But it's still, the control is still in the lens, okay? And I don't get what's called, well, I forget actually the actual term for it, but I call it touch-sensitive zooming, okay? So depending on how much pressure I put on the zoom switch determines how quickly the zoom, you know, zooms in or zooms out. And for me to adjust the speed of the zoom, I have to go into the menu. Well, I can't do that while I'm recording, okay? Now, I may not be recording on a camera, on a DSLR in a live environment. You know, you do have some of the initial, you know, first, second, third generation DSLRs had recording limitations, you know, of 12 minutes, of 15, 18 minutes, of 20 minutes. Now, I'm hearing that the newest generation of DSLRs, you know, they've managed to get around that. But it's still not an ideal situation. Now, I will say this. If you're not running through a switcher, okay, so if each camera is doing its own recording, we call that ISO recording or isolated recording, and you're going to edit all the angles together afterwards, I've got no problems, except for the servo zoom again. You can still have these cameras connected to a central person who's seeing all of them and directing the cameras, because I think that's important. But if everybody's kind of off doing their own thing in a live event, and they're all doing their own recording, and you're going to edit it all together without knowing what really what you're getting at the end of the event, because you don't have them connected to a central person who's directing them, because you don't have an intercom system, that's going to be an issue. Because what happens if you don't have any camera that's still on a stable shot for, you know, 30 seconds of a program? You either are going to have to put one of those shots in for those 30 seconds, or you're going to have to completely cut those 30 seconds out. And that may not work so well for you. Trust me, I've done this. So that is kind of the argument that I have for servo zoom. Any questions on that? Yeah, we're good? Okay. So moving on, we're going to go to kind of lens and focus controls. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the typical setup of a broadcast camera or a studio camera, but they have lens controls on what they call the handlebars of a tripod, and those are the arms off the back. A lot of people are familiar with one arm on a tripod, but they're most of the big boys, you know, big boys is broadcast, just for the sake of argument. They have two handlebars off the back, And on one handlebar, you'll have a zoom rocker, and I'm actively looking for an image of that. And the other handlebar will have a focus. It's like a throttle on a motorcycle, but it's perpendicular. So a throttle on a motorcycle is like that, and this is probably in your right hand is a twist action. So with the DSLR, you don't get that. Okay, and even with prosumer cameras, you get something called an LANC port, and I'm not really sure what the acronym stands for, but it allows you to focus or control focus and or zoom. And there are lens controllers on the market that are compatible with LANC that will allow you to control either zoom or focus, not both at the same time. There's at least a couple cameras on the market in the prosumer range that have two LANC ports, so you can have one remote for each. But the concept is that it allows you to be back from the camera behind it, looking at a monitor, versus having to be like this, with your hand on the focus and you're controlling the zoom back here, or you're controlling focus and zoom with one hand or the other. And that's really just not a good way. It's not a good solution. It's not a comfortable solution for your camera operators. It's certainly not a smooth solution. And yes, I know that they have wireless, what they call follow focus systems. Those tend to be pretty spendy, and still not the way that it should be done, because it requires a connection at the lens with a little bracket that goes around a toothed ring, I guess, that attaches to your lens focus ring, and then you've got another gear and this thing that you turn on the side. I'll find a picture of it for you. But that controls focus, great, but your hand still has to be up here. It's not back here giving you the control, with two arms on the tripod. And that may not seem that big of a deal. I've certainly worked in a 6-camera system where we didn't have dual arms. It was like this. But to control zoom and focus with one hand, not ideal. And you don't want to have the requirement of two people for every camera position, one to control focus, one to control zoom. That's not going to work so well. And I can tell you that on one of those DSLR lenses, if I'm running zoom like this, it's going to be very steppy. It's not going to be nice and smooth because it doesn't have that motorized gearbox to do that. I've heard some people say, well, use the follow focus system to do both, one for zoom and one for focus. Focus is okay to do that with because it's a free-flowing wheel or focus ring on the lens, not a big deal. The zoom ring, though, is usually much tighter and it requires a pretty strong grip. And the amount of tension that's required, the amount of grip that's required, is not going to be able to be matched by most of those follow focus systems. Now, here's an example of what a studio system looks like by the big boys. Okay, so this would be a zoom rocker. Okay, you see how it sits up off one of the handlebars here, and it has a cable that attaches it to the lens. And then over on the other side, you have the twist focus rocker, and that also has a cable that attaches to the lens. So that kind of gives you an idea of what that looks like. And I'll go ahead and pull up a follow focus setup so you guys can get an idea of what that looks like. Yeah, it's a perfect one right there. So let me screen share that. All right, so here is the, okay, so you see the blue ring here. That's the toothed ring that goes around the lens. Here's your gearbox. And you got a bunch of transfer gears in here, and this is what you turn. So you can see it's pretty bulky, number one. They do have what they call a whip that comes out of here, so you see this is kind of squarish. So they have an attachment that comes out of this on a very stiff cord, so you can stand away from the camera and control the focus. Now what this is really designed for is for on set, on a film set, where you have what's called a first camera assistant or a first AC that usually is responsible for controlling the focus, and the camera operator is responsible for moving the camera, be it on a Steadicam, be it on a jib, a crane, or whatever setup they have. So in live production, you don't have the personnel for that. So this is really not an ideal situation or solution for what we're doing in live production. So am I making a good argument here? Are you guys having any comments? Feel free to break in anytime you guys want. So let me get back to my notes here. Wait. All right, so I'm just actually going to leave this up on screen share. So let's do this. I want to show you guys the size difference. So see if I can find one here. Yeah, this isn't very big, so I apologize for that. But you can see that looks fairly okay, right? But if I open up another one and I say an E&G camera on a tripod, let's see what we find. So this isn't an E&G camera, but you can see that's much larger. That's actually a looks like a film digital cinema camera. So look at the difference here, right? So that's pretty considerable. And the reason that weight is important on a tripod is simply because it provides resistance for your arms, or drag, if you will. And that is what helps you create that fluid motion. Those smooth pans, those nice silky tilts. The less weight you have on a good solid tripod, the easier it is going to be to whip that camera around, because you don't have any resistance. Now, I understand that the tripod manufacturers now are coming out with tripods specifically built for the lighter cameras. I understand that. And okay, fine. This isn't as big a deal, but it is a big deal because from the standpoint that if you're upgrading old standard definition video cameras that weigh 10 pounds apiece, okay, and you're planning to go to, say, a Canon 7D, or I don't know what some of the newer ones are, I'm sorry, to a much lighter weight DSLR, okay, let's say it's 2 pounds. Well, that old tripod is still, was still manufactured for a much heavier load, and so you're actually going to be working harder to create those smooth moves than you would be with a heavier camera. So it is an important factor that, if you're just dead set on going with a DSLR setup in a live situation and just figuring out how it works, at the very least make sure that you're getting tripods that are matched for the lighter weight DSLRs. That's the best advice I can give you. So we're going to move on to depth of field. So let's just go over a brief definition of it. Okay, so this is the range of distance that appears acceptably sharp. So what's in focus in the image. Okay, it can vary depending on the camera type, the aperture, and the focusing distance. And you can see that there. So the way that DSLRs get away with a shallow depth of field. Okay, so let's type this in, and we'll go to images, and we'll show you examples of a shallow depth of field. All right, this looks like a really good example. All right, so you can see that the bug eyes are in focus, and a little bit of his, I guess we'll call that a nose, and some of the antennae here. Nothing else is in focus, maybe the tip of that branch. This is extremely shallow depth of field, so the amount of distance away from the lens that is in focus is actually very, very small. It looks to be maybe an inch in depth versus something that has much, much deeper depth of field. So we'll go with deep depth of field just to see what happens. So let's look at this one. All right, so what appears to be in focus is really, really deep. I mean, we're talking, maybe 150 feet here. And what affects that is a combination of your shutter speed, your aperture, and the size of your sensor. And essentially what allows DSLRs to get that shallow depth of field is the size of the sensor. That's primarily number one. They also have apertures that go pretty wide. Okay, so the more light that is able to get in, the shallower the depth of field becomes. And then your shutter speed also affects that. So in order to get a deeper depth of field, you would have to go from, say, an f2.8 aperture to, say, an f4 or an f5.6. So aperture is measured in numbers, and the lower the number, the bigger the opening. So the smaller the number, the higher the number, the smaller the opening. It's a little backwards, it's a little counterintuitive. But I just shot an interview last week, okay, on a 1.8, an f1.8 lens, which is what we call a fast lens, and they refer to fast or slow in relation to how quickly the light reaches the sensor. So it's a 1.8 lens, so it has a very wide aperture, a very open aperture. So I stopped that down. I moved that to f4 and increased. And I kept my shutter speed the same, actually, and I went from probably 6-inch depth of field to probably 1.5 feet, which was awesome because the interview subject can move around, backwards and forwards in relation to my lens, to my camera, and it didn't matter. He was in very sharp focus. It's one of the sharpest images I've ever gotten with that camera, which is awesome. So all that to say that a lot of people like the blur that they get, the shallow depth of field look. The area of the frame that's out of focus is often referred to as the bokeh or the bokeh, and people just love that. For some reason they just really like this shallow depth of field look, and I like it too. The problem comes in when you're trying to record or cover a live event, and you've got your subject, let's say you've got a side camera, okay, and all they're doing is walking back and forth on the stage, right? Let's say it's a pastor. That means your focus is changing constantly. And if you've ever run camera in an environment like that, where your hand basically never leaves the focus, it's exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. Whereas if you have a deep depth of field, then you don't have to work as hard. You still have to change the focus, but you don't have to work as hard because your focus isn't changing every 6 inches. It's not changing every foot. It's changing every maybe 6 feet or every 12, 15 feet. And that is really important. Now, some of you may say, well, what if I just, stop the lens down? What if I just let less light in to increase that depth of field? Well, that's great. Unless you're in a situation like a lot of small and medium-sized churches are in right now, where you don't have professional lighting set up. So you only have a finite amount of light that is going to be getting into the lens to begin with. And when you are closing that aperture down to increase your depth of field, because you don't want to have to be working so hard, that also means that less light is getting into the lens, which means you're getting a darker image. So in order to get acceptable exposure on the sensor, that means that you have to bump up the amount of light. So that's why when you're upgrading video, or if you're upgrading, well, yeah, if you're upgrading video, then it only makes sense to upgrade lighting at the same time. Because, you know, if you make your lighting look good for video, it's going to look awesome for the live audience. Whereas if you only make it look good for the live audience, it's not necessarily going to look good for video. So there are a lot of arguments for and against DSLRs. I'm just trying to come up, you know, with reasoning as to why I feel the way I do about them. So everybody with me so far? Yeah, all right, good. So we're going to move on to connectivity. So I don't know of a DSLR on the market today that comes with an HDSDI output. It just doesn't exist. And again, it's because they're not really designed to be used in a live environment. Now, HDSDI is the industry standard because it's based on the old SDI model, and it uses coax cable, and it has a connector that locks, which is, you know, kind of novel. It's helpful, and I'll pull up an image of a HDSDI connector here, so that you guys, if you're not familiar with it, you can become familiar with it. So the reason that SDI is so awesome is because not only does the connector lock, but it's also a very robust cable. Coax cable tends to be fairly thick, so there's your connector, and right here this is a male connector, so you can tell because it's got the little male part there. So this has two little cutouts here that slip over the female connector, and I'll show you that next. And then it twists and locks into place. Okay, so the pins lock into this little connector there. So, and having a locking connection just provides you with a really nice sense of security. And so here's a great example where you can see both. So sorry for the quality loss here, but there's a pin here and there's a pin on the other side that allow this collar to slip over and then twist around and lock. So whereas HDMI, no such thing as a locking HDMI connector or cable, as far as I know. So, you know, here's kind of the venerable HDMI connector. We're all kind of familiar with that. Pulls out fairly easily, let's be honest. So HDMI is still, I think, in its infancy, in that it's really, there is a standardized standard, if you will, or set of standards within the HDMI universe, if you will, or category, but not every manufacturer implements it the same. Excuse me. And because of that, you get equipment that has HDMI connectivity that doesn't always play nicely together. In addition to that, part of the HDMI standard is HDCP, High Definition Content Protection, which is meant to try and limit piracy. So piracy of HD content. That's really the purpose of it. And what it means practically is that it makes connecting HDMI devices together very, very difficult. So that being aside, so you don't have a locking connector, you have compatibility issues, we'll call it that. And oh yeah, you also have this issue of length. Now yes, they make 100-foot cables, but those have to be properly amplified or driven from the source end. And if you're running directly from a HDSLR, it may not have the amplification to drive it 100 feet because it's expecting an HDMI output to go to a 7-inch monitor that's on top of the camera. And the monitor may have an HDMI loop through, so you can come in from the camera and go out to your system. But again, the monitor is not necessarily expecting to send a HDMI signal 100 feet. Now, yes, they have HDMI baluns. I have not yet successfully installed an HDMI balun system where it was rock solid. In fact, it's been quite the opposite, to the point where I'm no longer specifying or recommending HDMI baluns at all. I'm choosing to switch it to DVI in hopes that will be a little more reliable. So that's been my experience, and so I can't, in good conscience, recommend HDMI as a connectivity solution for what we call transport, for long haul between, say, a camera that's 100 feet away from a video switcher. So that's connectivity. Next. Oh yeah, okay, so any questions on that? All right, we do have a question from Charles Smith. I will get to that in a minute. He's watching. His connection right now at the hotel is not as good as he would like it to be, which is why he's not with us live. So I just want to iterate again that if you're ISO recording the cameras to edit later, number one, I think that's fine. There's no problem with that as long as somebody is at the very least talking to the operators during the recording and directing them to get certain shots, so that there's always a cover shot, if you will, that is stable while everybody else is moving. Otherwise, it's just chaos. So with that being said, Charles has asked, how do you rate the following: DSLR, consumer camcorder, prosumer camcorder, professional camcorder? Where does DSLR fit in this range, in your opinion? Well, that's a good question. I guess I would have to ask, is this in the context of a live switched environment? And we'll see what he has to say about that. Because if we're talking about doing field production, then the DSLR would definitely be up there in the top two. But if we're talking about a live environment, I would almost put the DSLR at the same level as a consumer camcorder, because they're very likely to both have an HDMI output, but not have an HDSDI output. So from a connectivity standpoint, if the consumer camera has an LANC control port, I would probably rate that one higher than the DSLR because of that. However, from a connectivity standpoint, it's going to be about the same. Some people, this actually brings up a good point. Some people will say, well, there's converters that will take HDMI to HDSDI. Well, that's true. Every time you convert a video signal, you introduce around 1 frame of lag. And if you're taking your camera image and you're putting it up on a projection system, at some point, the amount of lag that it is introduced in the conversion process, because you're converting probably to HDSDI and then back to HDMI, potentially. Maybe not between the camera and the switcher, but definitely between the switcher and the projectors. Unless you're spending egads amounts of money on projectors that have HDSDI connections already on them, which tend to be pretty spendy. That's like a premium option to have. So you're going to be converting that back, so you got at least 2 frames of delay there. Every time you are introducing an effect or you're scaling the image, okay, at the switcher level, or at, let's say from the switcher you're going out to a presentation scaler, so that it can go from a 1920 by 1080 to, say, an XGA signal, which I think is 1024 by 768. That's another frame of delay. So you really got to go from the source to the destination and start adding up those frames of delay to really calculate how much delay is going to be introduced. So he's written back, sure, think like a small church. If you have little money to spend, which would you buy out of what I listed in this range? I'm always thinking of live streaming. Image quality and control is what concerns me most. Yes, okay. So with that context, I would say it would be worth it in the long run to actually save your money and get a low-level prosumer camera like a Canon XA20. Basically, whatever the smallest camera is that you can find, the lowest cost camera you can find that's made by a reputable manufacturer, number one, and two, has an SDI interface, an HD SDI interface. Make sure it states that clearly. I would say that would be the option that I would recommend, because that's going to serve you well into the future. HDMI, it's one of those specs that's just going to be changing. I think they're working on version 3 now. It has a lot of great benefits, HDMI does. I just don't think it's where it needs to be yet. It may be a great solution in the future, but right now it's just not there for me. Does that answer that question? Charles, he'll let me know in our little chat here. So, Mark, LaJuan, that's pretty much everything I've got, and that took right a little under half an hour. So, what questions do you have? What comments do you have? I'm curious.
For me, I never thought about the DLSR, about actually manually focusing that, because that was some of the questions I was talking about, why we bought the cameras that we did for, because I'm like seeing some other people doing some of these shots. I can see a DLSR just mounted on a tripod, but I thought maybe, because you do get HD with those things. The new cameras are great for video recording, but I never thought about the focusing part and that zooming in and out. We don't do a lot of that at our church because we have a 2-camera setup, and so we got a tight shot and a big shot, so we're just switching back and forth. And now we have a new robotic, but still, which is joystick control. But I'm glad I came in and listened to this to kind of, just for my own benefit, why we didn't get what we did, and the reasoning why, and especially like you said, the topology how it hooks up is not what we're looking for to go to either. So, no, this is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that while we're talking about, kind of small church environments, if all you're doing is static shots, okay, so let's say you've got a static wide shot, nobody's even at the camera, it's just on this wide shot.
Yep.
Right. I've got no problem with a DSLR being used for that. I would assume that your other camera has an operator?
No, we have 2 there, and then our robotic is one of those.
Oh, your robotic, right. Okay. But somebody's operating that. They, either pushing buttons for the presets, or they're using the joystick to actually follow the action to a certain degree. Both. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good hybrid system. I've got no problem saying, I've got my own issues with robotics. I will never ever spec a system where it's all robotic. A typical 3-camera system, you're gonna have 1 camera on each side, one camera in the center. That camera in the center is gonna have an operator. You may not agree with me. You may put in all robotics, but I will not specify a system without a live camera operator, because I don't care how good you are on the remote, you're never gonna be able to respond as quickly in the moment when something unexpected happens as a live camera operator, assuming that the operator is properly trained. So I think that's a good hybrid system. One issue that you may have noticed, or that may come up in the future, is color balance between different manufacturers, because you got 2 different chipsets that you're using. There's a reason that let's say that 6-camera system that I was using, I helped put together. They were all Canon cameras. So we had 4 Canon XLH1s, and then we had 2 XL XH-G1Ss, and all from Canon. Okay. Basically the same camera. The only difference is that the form factor was different, the price point was different, and the H1 cameras had interchangeable lens capability. Only difference. Same chipset and all that. We still had color balance issues between, even the H1s. Taking the G1Ss out of it. So there's a reason that you have things called shaders. Okay, these are people who sit in a TV station or in a master control area, and all they do is switch between cameras. They got a little monitor, and they're checking color, they're checking brightness, they're checking what we call pedestal level. That's your black level, to make sure everything matches. Now, to get that capability takes a lot of money, and so a lot of smaller churches, one, don't even know about that. And 2, even if they do know about it, they don't think it's that important because they're looking at money. And I have to agree. Unless you're going after a full-scale, large format broadcast ministry, I don't think it's that important. I don't think it's important enough. I don't think your audience is going to sit there, that camera doesn't match. Honestly, after encoding, they're usually close enough that they're not going to be able to tell the difference. And this is, again, where lighting comes in. If your lighting is done correctly, then yes, on a 46-inch screen, sitting this far away from it, I'll be able to tell the color difference because I'm looking at basically uncompressed signals. But once I encode it for the internet, because that's where, honestly, most churches are sending their signals, is out to the live stream, they're not really going to be able to tell the difference unless the lighting is way, way off. So that would be the only concern that I have, but again, it's not really a priority. But I don't know, have you seen color differences?
Oh, it's terrible right now because I think I shared with you last time we were converting HDMI down to composite. And
right,
so like you
video
said,
soup.
Yep, and then the camera's just, I don't know. So we're working on it. A lot of people have commented on what's wrong with the other camera. So we know we're going to get it fixed. So
yeah, absolutely. And as long as you have an answer for that, that's great. And you know why it's happening. That's the other important thing.
Right. So I know that you covered this, but I just want to go over it one more time too. Is that we are getting the Black Magic? It'll be here in a week or two. So we're not converting all over to SDI and HDMI. So out of our cameras, we do HDMI. That's what's on our cameras that we have. So we're going to go, just because of the length of it, we are going to switch over and convert to SDI and bring all SDIs, but we're going to convert all the cameras. We're not going to run a hodgepodge between HDMI and SD. We're going to convert everything so that frame rates then, like you said, it's very important as you start to convert or whatever you're doing, you're going to drop a frame out. And so we're going to match everything up, I think, and convert everything to SDIs and bring that into the Black Magic.
Nice, nice. I'm not sure on the actual evidence of this or utility of this or necessity, that's the word. But I had heard at one point in time when HD live production was kind of just filtering down into the churches, so 2006, somewhere in there, that the cable lengths between your cameras should be the same length. So even if your physical distance between, say, your center camera and your switcher is 20 feet, the furthest distance from, say, your side camera to your switcher is 50 feet. Then all cable lengths should be 50 feet, so that all the signals arrive at the same time. I don't think that's as big a deal as it used to be, but you may want to think about it. If you've got the cable length, you might as well. Like I said, I don't think it's a huge deal. I've seen systems work with all kinds of different lengths, and the switchers these days, they've got what they call TBCs, time-based correctors, in them. I think that will take care of that. So I just wanted to mention that in case you wanted to try that, or if you started experiencing some weird issues with timing, that may be why.
Okay.
So, Flawan, you've been kind of quiet.
Well, I've just been listening. We don't have that problem right now because we just have one camera, so it's always good to pick up some information. But I know with tripods though, the heavier the tripod, the steadier it is because it's not so easy to move. So I have a real nice silk tripod for the camera with a pistol grip that works pretty good for taking pictures, and it's nice and smooth. A pain to carry, but it's nice and smooth, So I carry for special occasions. Other times I leave it at home, it won't fit on my motorcycle. But like I said, that makes a difference. The right base makes a difference.
Yeah, I would say even if you're going to go cheap on the cameras, don't go cheap on your support. There is a very big difference between the Velbon, the $40 Velbon you're going to find down at your local, home electronics store, and the $500 Bogen Manfrotto that you're going to find at, say, B&H or Full Compass or Sweetwater or whatever. There is a reason for that price difference, and like I said, if you're going to use a lightweight camera, you can get a lightweight tripod. But usually what we're referring to as lightweight is the camera or the tripod head, the part that the camera mounts onto physically. We're not talking about the legs. I have a Sackler tripod. It's German made, and I've had that since 2007. I do need to send it in to get fixed because I took it out in some really bitter cold weather and plastic parts started snapping off the legs. But still works. I mean, the thing is a tank. I paid $1,000 for it in 2007. But again, that was 2007. That was 8 years ago, and it's just now starting to show some age. I'd say that's a pretty solid investment. Now, I submit my equipment to a lot harsher rigors than you guys necessarily will inside a church environment. I take my equipment everywhere. It's outside, it's inside, it's in the mud, it's in the rain. It's never shot in the snow, but I'm sure it's coming. So given that investment has lasted this long before it started breaking down even a little bit, shows that getting quality equipment, it's strong, it's worth the investment, and it's treated me right. Now, the other thing is, I take it out to the beach, I shoot at the beach. I clean it off. I extend all the legs, I wipe it down, I try to get all the sand out of it. I take care of my equipment. So, very similarly to a car. You take care of your car, it will take care of you. You take care of your equipment, it will take care of you if you get quality equipment. Now, having said all that, I do think DSLRs have their place. I think they're incredible tools. My camera is not a DSLR because it's a mirrorless system. It doesn't have a mirror in it, and that is part of the definition of what makes a DSLR a DSLR. There's the pentameter, the mirror that flips up to allow the light to go through to the sensor. So because of that, the reason I got it is because there's no mirror, there's nothing to overheat, there's no recording limits, blah, 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 blah. I still get the shallow depth of field, I get the interchangeable lenses, I get a very small form factor. In fact, give me a second. So this is my camera right here. Very small. And you can see I've got a lens adapter on it. So I adapt to Nikon lens, Nikon mount. All right, so this is my 50mm 1.8, and works very well. It's what's called a prime lens. It's called a prime because it doesn't zoom. 50mm, that's it. But if I take the lens adapter off, you can see right there, that's the sensor. There's no mirror. It is reflecting, but if I turn it off to the side here, let's see. That is the sensor. So that's why it's called a mirrorless system. And they're very, very popular. You can see it's a Lumix GH2. It is backwards, but it's backwards to me. I don't know if it's backwards to you. Lumix. So it's a very nice little system. You know, it's got an SD card that goes in there. Battery has a dual lock door. You know, so there's the door locks and the battery locks, which is really nice. So you know, it's not an ad for this thing, but it's very small. You know, if I take this off, that's it. You know, not that big. Whereas, you know, some of the Canon units, the Nikon units, they tend to be a bit bigger, and they have their own little appeal. You know, you show up with a Canon 5D Mark II or a 7D, and it just looks good. You know, it looks beefy, and so people have this perception that you're professional and you know what you're doing. And the tools don't make the product. You know, it's the person that's using the tools that makes the product. And so that's important to this discussion because you can use low-cost tools to produce an amazing product. You know, I can use consumer camcorders going through a live switch system like the Blackmagic Television Studio. If I have amazing lighting, I would challenge the average user to tell the difference, honestly. You don't need a DSLR to make a great image, you know, and honestly, like I said before, if it came between a consumer camcorder that had an LENC remote input and a DSLR, I'd go with the consumer camcorder every time for a live switch system, simply because I get that remote control. I don't really know where I was. I think that's where I need to land with that comment.
No, it's a good point. It's the difference. You can have a Cadillac or a Toyota. You know, there's still, depending on what you're doing, you can do, as say with fuel, you can go a lot farther with Toyota than you can with a Cadillac. You know, so sometimes just because the brand is not always the best for the job.
Well, that's true, and you know, there's something to be said about being a brand shopper, being brand loyal, but I think we've kind of passed out of that age. You know, I think we've entered into an age where, you know, we as shoppers want the best value, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand that value is different than low price.
Right.
And we need to kind of get into this mindset of what am I getting for my money? Okay, instead of what am I getting for this price, you know, and because you can go down to any Fry's and you can get a action video camera, as they call them, for $50-$70, right? Just like you can go on to, you know, a bunch of different deal websites and you can get an Android tablet for $50.
Yeah.
Right. From some no-name manufacturer. Okay, 6 months down the road, do you think that thing's going to be working?
No. Well, it may be an hour when you get home and doesn't have the Play Store, and then you're stuck.
Right.
You know, so it depends on the equipment. Nowadays, right now with technology, is you really have options on quality compared to price nowadays, which you didn't have 2 years ago. You know, 2 years ago you couldn't find a good phone under $400 or $500 that was decent. Nowadays you can spend less than $100, $150, and get a decent phone that has the software, may not the same specs, but it still do a good job for the value. So it's nowadays there's a lot of difference, you know. So it's changing, you know. And a lot of people don't think about that. They think, oh, it's a name. The name is good, but if you don't use it, you rather want something that's going to last you, and that's a better value for you.
Right. Absolutely. So let's bring this back to the context of live switch. Live switch, okay? So I'm a church, and I say, okay, I can do HDSLRs, okay, and I can use them inside the church for a live switch system, and I can take them out of the church. I can send one in the spring on a mission trip, and they can get great footage, and they can come back. We can edit a really nice video together. What this becomes then is a discussion about priorities. So is it more important, is it a higher priority to have a really nice end product that is usable, that, you know, utilizes all the tools or most of the tools in a live switched environment, like push and pull zoom or servo zoom, like having good connectivity on the camera. Is that more important for the majority of the year, of the time it's going to be used right now, as well as 5-10 years down the road? Let's just say 5. Let's be realistic. And then maybe I can take one of those cameras out and I can get pretty good footage for the mission trip that happens once a year. Or do I want a really great camera that I can take out once a year, and then I have to do a whole bunch of engineering. I have to figure out how I'm going to get around all this other stuff to make an adequate live production product. You know, an adequate live stream, let's just put it that way. I can't answer that for you. I think it's better to have decent video product for both the mission trip and the live production system, rather than weighting it to one side to say, okay, we're going to get a DSLR because we want really great video from the mission trip, versus having maybe not so good user friendliness and that kind of thing for the rest of the year for our volunteer operators inside the church environment. I have to then ask the question, which one is the better decision in terms of stewardship? And I know that we hammer stewardship a lot on these Hangouts, but it's because it's so critically important. This is money that God has given us access to, that people have given out of the graciousness of their heart, trusting that the church is going to invest that wisely. And let's be honest, even with the best of intentions, that money is not invested well some of the time. And when you make a poor investment, it's not only a bad stewardship thing, but it also makes people a little more gun-shy to give money when you ask for it again. And that is an important thing that you really need to think about, because, you know, it's one thing to say, you know what, this one piece of equipment that we bought was $500. It really is just not the right thing for what we need. We're going to send it back and we're going to reevaluate. Okay, that's a mistake. Okay, that's an honest mistake. That's over here. Okay, it's quite another to say we're going to invest 25 grand in a live production system because we want cameras that we can take outside and produce great quality video outside the church, and then but we're going to sacrifice the image quality and the user friendliness and all the things we've talked about because we're going to use those same cameras in our live production system for our live stream for 52 weeks out of the year. That's a completely different, you know, that's not necessarily ignorance. That's an active decision that you're weighting the quality of the video to be produced outside of the church, out in the field, as we call it, and sacrificing kind of the usability of the system inside the church, where it's going to be used the most. And then to kit or to outfit or to accessorize a DSLR to be used properly in a live environment, you're going to be spending as much, if not more, than you would on the prosumer level cameras anyway to get the same functionality or similar functionality. So that's why the stewardship discussion is so important to this discussion, because I think personally it's a waste of money and it's not a good investment for everybody. Now, if you got static shots, that's a different story. But Mark, let me ask you this. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that instead of getting the robotic camera, you got 2 DSLRs, okay? And let's say in this time next year, your church decided that it wanted to live stream and have live operators, and you know they wanted a really more dynamic live stream product, if you will. They wanted camera moves. They wanted you to zoom in and out while on air. You know, they wanted all this stuff. If you had DSLRs and you had to go back to them and say, we're really not outfitted for that, how do you think that would go over?
Yeah, not good at all. Not good at all. We're not being good stewards, and that would have been a short thought or a short. We didn't really think ahead out there on that equipment, and not that we have to buy expensive equipment because we think we're going to do that, but there's some sure, especially with your guys' help, hey, this is what you can do with this kind of equipment, and this can set you out 5 years, and I think we're good with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. But this also brings up the importance of getting leadership involved in the discussion before you buy anything to say, okay, what's your vision for the future? Where do you see this? Where do you want this ministry going in the future? Because if you don't have that conversation, then it's very likely you will be having that conversation just in a bad way when they come to you and say, we want to do this, and you're telling me that we can't. Then why do we spend the money on this?
Yeah, right, because we have that kind of a situation where we do maybe once or twice a year do baptisms down at the lake. So we drag the equipment down there. You know, we do get some good shots, but it's not switched. We're going to switch this year because it took me 10 hours to put everything together, if not more. So this year we're going to switch. But yeah, you're right. I mean, why? You know, yes, they want to do that, but we surely need to explain to them that why what we get, and try to match both of those worlds and explain to them so that they have an understanding, right? What that expectation is. Because if long as we share that up front, what that expectation is going to be, it saves a lot of turmoil at the end when, hey, we thought I was going to do this, and it's like, no, we explained to you why we're doing what we're doing.
Exactly. I mean, it's very beneficial when you have that discussion up front before you make any equipment purchases and you explain, this is what the system is capable of, this is what it's not capable of, and this is, you know, basically this is the reason why we're choosing this equipment, because, and it usually has to do with budget, let's be honest. You know, they come to you and they say one of two things. They say, okay, we want you to go out and research and find out how much it's going to cost, but remember, keep it as low as possible because we don't have that much money. So that's number one. Or number two, they will set your budget for you. They will say, we have $1,000. And this is what we want to do. And we as techs have a really bad habit of saying, okay, we're going to have to fit everything into that budget, which is where we get into trouble. Because we say, well, I can't afford this equipment because it's outside the budget, so I'm going to cut capability and quality in order to meet the budget instead of doing the research, finding out what it is that we need and how much that costs, and then going back and saying, I cannot do it for that amount of money and produce a quality product, but here's what will do it and how much that will cost. And I would advise that, you know, we put this in front of the church, cast the vision, and let them decide if they want to support that.
Correct. Or should we save and do it next year?
Right. Because
that's real important.
I would say that there's an old saying, old for me at least, that an emergency on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine.
Correct.
So if you're not going to, you as the leader, let's say the pastor, the leadership of the church, whatever form that takes, if you're not going to have the foresight to think ahead and say, okay, we're going to need this and we want it by this time, then why am I being saddled, if you will, or required to produce a solution in a ridiculous time frame just so that you can meet the vision that you didn't tell anybody about, right? How is that fair to me? Whereas what should be happening is open and honest communication back and forth between all parties. So let's put a spin on this, okay? So Lawan, you and I, we've been talking offline about a situation that your church is in. You know, they want to upgrade some stuff. So let's say they came to you one day, let's say a Sunday, okay? You get a phone call from the pastor, and the pastor says, Lawan, we decided at church board, and let's say, I don't know if you're on the church board or not, but let's just say you're not for the sake of argument. We just had a business meeting or church board meeting, and we decided that we want to install a really big projection screen in the middle of the church. Now, obviously, architecturally, that wouldn't work for your space, but let's just say stranger things have happened. Let's just put that out there, right?
Yeah.
And he says, and we'd like to have that installed by next weekend.
Yeah, I tell them, myself, I tell them no. I said, it don't work like that because first, you have to what you want. There's not just one thing. And that's the problem I think churches have. They figure they want to do this, but they don't understand that there's other things that go along with that, you know? So I'm the kind of person, I'm going to tell you straight up. You may not like it, I'm going to tell you no, we need to research and then figure out what we're doing first. Know what we want to do before we do it, because if you spend this money and it doesn't work, you know, you're not coming back mad at me because it's not like what you wanted because it's a rush job. I quit doing rush, myself, I don't do rush jobs. You tell me what I'm going to do, I'll find it for you, and then you decide. But I'm not jumping into it quick because it caused all the problems later on because now it's too big or it doesn't fit. And instead of coming back and saying, well, I told you, no, we're going to take our time. You know, if it's not fast enough, then I can't do it, you know, because there's consequences of rushing. And sometimes just because you want that, it's not really what you want. And that's the problem. You know, you got to, with churches, period, you got to educate yourself first, because a lot of people want to do stuff, but they don't know what's included to do the stuff, you know, and all they want to do is now, but that causes problems because now you want a video camera and they went and got you one at Walmart, but now it won't do what you want to do. Instead of saying, let's go to B&H or somewhere and get a good camera, and then they can do, maybe we're not ready for it, but at least we can do what we want to do as we grow in what we're doing. You know, so you have to do that. But a lot of people, makes it difficult with churches because they want it now instead of saying, you know, let's plan this out, you know, and you know what we're going through, you know, so you have to plan it out, you know, because if not, you miss stuff that you don't have, and then you're mad because, well, why you do that? Well, you said you want it now. So you have to sometimes, with church members, tell them no. Say no, because, you know, I don't want to be responsible for a half done job, you know, or whatever it is, you know. But church members, it's hard to explain it to them, you know. And with technology, churches don't understand at all sometimes, so it makes it real hard. They want what they want, but they don't know what they want, you know. And they expect you to know what they want, but how do you know what they want if they don't know what they want, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. You know, you get a lot of, you get leaders who naturally want to lead, and so they're very accustomed to asking people to do things for them, and they're used to people actually saying yes and doing things for them. They're not used to getting pushback. And so let's take this hypothetical situation, okay? So they've asked you for this, you know, gigantic screen. Some of the first questions, right? So, okay, how big is big? You know, give me some dimensions to play with here. And usually that's going to be a conversation that has to happen inside the space so you can see visually, okay, you want a 20-foot by 15-foot screen? Okay, let's see what that looks like. You know, because, again, this addresses your issue of, you know, you get the screen in, it's big by your definition, but it's medium-sized by the pastors, right? So there's a miscommunication there. And if you don't go down this rabbit hole of, or rabbit trail of you know, next questions, okay, you're going to get into a situation where you've got this gigantic screen, you're using your current projector, which was not designed for a screen that large, and so it is very dim. Then the pastor's saying, well, it's really dim. Well, yeah, of course, you're taking this much light and you're spreading it over this much more surface area. You know, so now we're talking about upgrading the projector. You know, and okay, well, you want it in the center, but we have a projector that's mounted right now from the ceiling over on the side, so now we got to get a new mount. And oh, well, we want to increase the resolution, so that affects a whole bunch of stuff. Maybe you need a new computer, maybe you need a new signal transport system. Like you said, you know, there's more than just a screen. You change one thing in a system, and it can change the entire system. So, for example,
it can be an avalanche.
Right, exactly. It's a ripple effect. So, for example, our church, it's a mobile church. We want a new video system because we want to kind of bump up our quality. Well, that's going to require a new camera. That's going to require a new output from the computer. We need an adapter to go to HDMI instead of VGA. We need a new splitter, a new distribution amplifier to take that HDMI signal and send it to the projector, send it to the recording computer, send it to the TV monitor that's up front. Oh, we need new Balun systems because they're VGA based, and now we need DVI. So, oh, the current projector doesn't have DVI or HDMI. It's just VGA and composite. Well, we need a new projector then. It starts to cascade. It starts to avalanche. It starts, you know, this ripple effect, and all of a sudden, your little small investment becomes this. And if you don't know that up front, you're going to spend the next, several months figuring that out. You're not going to be happy because you're going to be stressed out because the leadership is stressed out because they didn't know about this, and the church membership is going to be stressed out because what they saw as, well, it should just be easy. You get a new screen, all of a sudden it's grown into this, we need more money, we're sorry it's wrong, we're sorry we're having issues. It's a no-win situation for anybody.
Yeah.
So, know what you don't know. Know what you don't know. And basically, the way that you do that is you sit down and you say, okay, I want to upgrade the cameras, right? Or we want to get a camera system in here, a live production system. Okay, where do I start? I don't know. At that point, you have discovered what you don't know. So go find somebody that does know what you don't know.
Yep.
You know, there's people like me. There's people like Paul Allen Clifford. There's people like, I mean, heck, call it B&H.
Yeah.
Find out what they have to say.
Question.
Exactly.
You know, if you don't know, if you're scared and ask questions, it's going to cause you problems, because I'd rather have the information and have the right information than you have half information, and then it does you no good, because now your $50 job becomes $250 job, and they say, oh, we didn't know it was this much. Well,
right.
If you would have done your research, you would have found out how much it is. But you got to do that first. You got to do research.
Thing. If you can't get your ego out of the way because you're afraid you're going to look stupid because you're asking questions,
you're going to look stupid.
You're going to look stupid anyway.
Yeah.
Just going to put it out there.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we're going to wrap up, unless you guys have any other comments or questions.
No,
nope. Okay, doesn't look like it. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up, and we're going to have another exciting topic next week, and I promise that will start on time. So with that, thanks for watching, and as always, if you want to get in touch with me or anybody here in the Hangout, you can look us up on Google Plus in the Church Tech community and or the Adventist Church Tech community. My name is Tim Adams. That's LaJuan Hughes. That's Mark Britton. And we will see you later.